So the wooden boats really took up the first 20 years or so of my career. And trying to find the photographs that I needed was pretty difficult. I just happened to be a marine artist as well as a naval architect. So what I've done is collect 10 paintings of my 10 personal boats, and we'll show them shortly. But first I'd like to discuss a little bit about wooden boats versus other mediums of construction. I've had hands-on experience with timber, with steel, with aluminium, and with GRP, fiberglass. I have to say that timber is beautiful. The smell, the shavings coming off when you work with good sharp tools is a delight. Steel is hot, disgusting, it cuts you to pieces, so whenever I've had a steel boat, it's been done by someone else. Aluminium's not much better, it's noisy, you're sawing it, there's bits of aluminium going everywhere, so aluminium's not too good either. And fiberglass is totally disgusting. So, well, let's go on with wooden boats. I've had wooden boats all my life and thoroughly enjoy them. People say they're hard to maintain. They're not if you keep at them. So what I'll do is put up my boats one after the other, give you a brief talk about each one, and here we go. Here we go. Nothing happening.
I don't know. Which one are you pushing? That one, I hope.
Nothing happening. Pardon us for...
Yeah.
It's okay, hang on a tick.
Okay. This little boat was wasn't my first boat, it was my third boat, but the first one which we could go cruising in. Just I keep near the microphone. I bought it in Claremont from a guy who had joined the forces, and I was younger, for quite a very small amount of money, which my grandfather gave me. And she was a clinker-built boat, been kept in a shed for 2 years and thoroughly dried out. So I put it in the water and it promptly sank. It not only sank the first time I put it in the water, it sank every week when I tried to sail it. So I had to bail it out every week. So I took it home on a truck to my mother's home and in the backyard and totally rebuilt the boat from stem to stern. All the fastenings were redone, some replanking, and at that time I was totally amateur boat builder, but I got it to the point where we could cruise up and down the coast. It was on that boat that I was in Mandurah in 1944, and I happened to meet my wife on the causeway between the Mandurah and the old pub. So that's where I met my wife, on that boat. What's happening?
Okay, is this one instead? Just the button on the side there.
That one?
Yep.
Got it. Wrong, got to go back. Got to go back one.
Button just to the left. The back.
Okay, this is Rebel. Rebel was the first little keel boat that we owned. It was 18 feet long. It was 16 feet 3 on the waterline, weighed about 1.75 tons, and there were only 2 keel boats that size on the Swan River when we built it. And my fiancée and I built it over 18 months, 2 years before we were married. We actually went on board on that boat straight after our marriage and had 3 months cruising in an 18-footer for a honeymoon. And we actually, during that period, we sailed that little boat down to Bunbury and down to Geograph Bay, 18-footer. So it was a dear little boat. I used to call it the Buff Orpington, because when she was going to windward, she sort of bustled around. She was fat and short, but she was very, very seaworthy. Quite a lovely little boat. That's Wraith. That's the third boat that my wife and I built when we were young. And we also built that in the backyard of my mother's house. It was a little... I like double enders. I thought I'd try a one, and we made a very small, light one, which was fast. And both my wife and I were altitudinally challenged, so we were very, we were very happy on this little Wraith. That is a first ocean racing boat I built. I'd been sailing with friends from Freshwater Bay when the Bunbury race started in 48, 49, and done several Bunbury races. And I was interested in ocean racing because I was interested in the ocean anyway. So I built the 30-foot Karen to compete in the Bunbury race. In my first outings, 1956, I won. In 1957, I won. And in 1958, Merv Finn, a famous sailor, beat me because running home from Bunbury up over the Boatyards reefs with a spinnaker set, we were broaching all over the place. So I took my kite down. All the boats behind me also took their kites down. But Merv Finn, famous Merv Finn, with a tumbler, the same length as this boat, kept his kite up, and in spite of being pooped and the radio washed out of the all sorts of problems with salt water coming over the stern, he won the race and I was second. That's my first essay into a powerboat, because I've been designing a huge number of plywood fast crayfish boats for Geraldton clients and other people when the crayfishing industry was really taking off after the Second World War. So I thought, well, I was deep sea fishing amateur at the time, and diving, wreck diving, all that sort of thing. So I designed one where we could have 4 people in the cockpit, we could carry our acrongs, and we could do 16 knots with 115 horsepower. We could go for long range, deep diving, or fishing up on the reefs north of Fremantle. The main mast is permanent, but the mizzen actually is the dinghy sail, which was only put up when I thought I might like to have to sail somewhere. It wouldn't sail, it wasn't a motor sailor, but if the motor ever broke down, I could reach somewhere and I could just make to windward. But we didn't use it as a sailboat, but it made a nicer picture. I might add that all these pictures you're seeing are taken from watercolour paintings I've done, which are hanging on the entry in my house. After the powerboat, I wanted to go back to racing and sailing, so I built this 28-footer, traditional type of ocean racing boat for those days, but full accommodation. That boat is probably the most perfectly balanced sailing boat I have ever sailed. You could sail her to windward in a howling breeze with your little finger. You could take a hand off the helm and she would do just as well as you could with sailing it yourself. So she was a delightful boat. In the Bunbury race we won first up, a competitor in a tumbler, the same size as that. We beat him off the stick all the way around the course, and while we were eating in our dinette, having ham and eggs for breakfast, I think our competitor was probably having a cold sandwich. That's a motor sailor that we built. When I became very busy with my practice, I decided I'd build a motor sailor, long range, so that we could cruise up and down the coast in short order If we were going to windward, we didn't bother with the sails. If we were off the wind, we set the gear, and we could cruise that boat from Fremantle to Shark Bay and back without refuelling. So it was very, very good. It was designed for very economic running. She could do 8 knots point to point on absorbed 35 horsepower. So it was very, very economical. And my son grew up on that boat, and we cruised thousands and thousands of miles in it over a period. I don't want to go too fast, I'm just watching the clock. That's our 40-foot motor sailor, which we built after the Karen, and that's taken in Bunker Bay, where I used to go for my birthday every second year, and have it in Bunker Bay. I have to say I'm cheating a bit because that hull was steel, but all the superstructure, the decks, the superstructure and the interior were all beautiful timber, which I built myself. I might add that the boats you've seen so far, the first 3 were built entirely with my own hands, including casting the lead keel, the whole bit. This one I had the hull built, and I did everything else in my spare time. And we cruised that boat for many hundreds and thousands of miles anyway. That's where are we now? South Wind. That's the Randell 33 motor sailor, which I did some years. A syndicate of us got together and decided we like a motor sailor, and I thought, well, I like a motor sailor, but I want to go back to racing as well. So I designed the 33. It's a keel centreboard boat, chine, not too heavy, medium displacement, with a cast iron keel and a centreboard pivoted in this cast iron keel. So she drew 1 metre without the plate down, and she drew 2 metres with the centre plate down. And that boat, off the wind, could beat an SS-34, because she could do 11.5 knots off the wind with a spinning cassette. And on the wind, she would be, in an hour and 40 minutes race, windward to leeward, she would be 1 minute behind an SS-34. So that was quite a brilliant boat. The syndicate, the builders who actually built the boat for the 3 of us, then tried to market them, but nobody knew that it was any good. Thought it was totally unlike a motor sailor. But it looked slightly like a motorboat. So they couldn't sell them. But now we found them in New Zealand, in Phuket, all over the place with people and they love them and they take them deep sea. And I said to one guy who'd taken one to Phuket, well, it's designed as a coastal boat, it's not heavy displacement, and when it's blowing 40 knots, what do? He said, well, all we did is we took all the sails off, we lashed everything down, we went down below and just said, let it do. And the boat went bob, 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 just sideways. It didn't cause any problem at all. So yeah, that was very successful. My last one, that is also, you would be surprised, a motor sailor. And that was powered by a 200 horsepower Yamaha outboard. And it was designed in such a way, she had a keel, a direct keel underneath, and the aft end of the keel I fitted with a rudder which tapered the keel straight away to a lovely streamline, far enough ahead of the outboard motor so you didn't get cavitation. And when I wanted to sail the boat, all I had to do was unlock the rudder, because the tiller was inboard up against the mizzen mast on a hinge, crank the outboard motor out of the water, set a big genoa, set the mizzen, and we could sail it just like a yacht, up to windward racing. It would do 7 knots sideways in a good sea breeze with a beam wind. So that was a brilliant little boat. So Tony and I had that for 15 years, and we had to sell it when she became ill. So that's the story of my wooden boats. Professionally, of course, I did designed hundreds of crayfish boats, fishing boats, pleasure boats, until the age of fiberglass. When fiberglass started, all the wooden boats designs gave up. The second part of my talk is about the legend of Rugged. Now, the current Rugged owner is here and his family. He's owned it before, previously, bought it back again. But the story of Rugged is a legend. At the time it was thought of, I was working with the Public Works Department, and I became friends with a guy in the chief clerk who wanted a little boat. He said to me, well, will you design me a little knockabout keel boat, about 23 feet long, something like that. And I had already designed the Rebel, of course. So I said, yeah, well, I'll do that. So on the kitchen table, I designed him the Rugged. And the good part of the story is coming now. Bill Green was the name of the owner. He only had one hand. He was cut off on his left hand at the wrist. The story, which may or may not be true, about how he left his hand was that in his misspent youth he blew it off with dynamite, dynamiting fish, but we can't be sure that's true. But this guy was a wonderful character. He'd been represented for Shell Company all around the country, and he became an alcoholic, became a cured alcoholic, and his final job was with the Public Works Department in the same building that I worked in. Anyway, he had a friend, Lou Shepcott, and between them they built this boat. But to see Bill cutting a rebate or a notch was a sight to see, because he actually put the chisel in there like that, and then he went boom, boom, boom. Pretty difficult. I gave him quite a bit of help by holding the dolly when we were riveting up. And also he was away for some reason or other one Easter, so I whipped over and put the last 4 planks on him and then cut the shear line ready for him to start doing the deck. She was launched in, I think, 52. Yeah. And yeah, we were delighted with it. Yeah, I sailed a Bunbury with him. No, not the first one. He did a Bunbury race with his own crew and didn't do any good. I sailed it the next year and we got a 3rd place, but we used to go to Rottnest in it and all that sort of thing. No engine, but it sailed delightfully and was so simple, the whole thing. Anyway, the Royal Perth Yacht Club had decided that they would get into ocean racing because Freshwater Bay was taking all the glory. And we formed a committee and decided to race the Cape Naturaliste, which was longer, of course, and more complex than the Bunbury race. Unfortunately, well, I was on the handicapper committee and we got it all set up with John Fitzharding, and it was decided that I would skip a Rugged. Unfortunately, a week before the race, Bill Green died of a heart attack. So his widow said, well, you continue, you sail the race, we want you to sail the race, which I did. We started, the course for that race was starting in Fremantle Harbour at 11 o'clock in the morning, going down Coburn inside Garden Island, out through South Passage, and by thence to Bunker Bay. There was a mark. I don't know whether you all know about the West Coast, but coming from Fremantle going south, you go down the coast for a bit south of, a bit east of south, and then down into Geograph Bay, it curves back into a big point to Cape Naturaliste. And just inside Cape Naturaliste is Bunker Bay. And we had a Dan buoy there for the turning mark with the Royal Navy, Australian Navy, with a protection boat for us anchored to make sure what's happening.
Excuse me, Len, you might want to use
The race started in a light easterly.
Len, you might want to use the clicker just to
Yeah.
advance the thing.
Yep. I'm sorry, this is the construction. I'm glad I was reminded. Just in the backyard, that's the in-rib ready to go. I'll just show these to you because I've missed that. There's the little rugged ready for painting. So she's near completion. Rugged on the Swan River, just after being launched. So simple little boat. And there she is in her new livery, all cleaned up, courtesy of Ken Court. There we are, as she is now. I was going to do this at the end, but it doesn't matter. There we are. That's passing Bunker Bay Mark and coming on the wind to go to Siesta Park and to Bunbury. And at that point, we are dropping Bill Green's ashes into the water. His widow asked us to take his ashes and drop them in the race, and we thought the weather mark would be the ideal place. I'll leave that up if you like. Okay, the conduct of the race started in a light easterly, out through the southern flats and out to sea. It was the breeze by then was getting around to the southwest, and it came into about a 20-knot southwester. And on our way down, of course, she's going down on the starboard tack because the coast bears away, and from fairly inshore there, it's fairly tight sail down to Mandurah. So she was holding her own on rating, going down to Mandurah. And at that point, you have to make a decision about what you're going to do. If you're sailing to Bunbury, you stay on the coast and you short tack as the breeze goes from southwest to southeast. Now, I'd already sailed down to Bunker Bay in my little boats, and I dwindled up anyway, and I knew that on a normal summer day, the breeze went from southwest and it gradually came round and round and round till about midnight it was easterly. So I thought, well, it's not a very good idea to keep going down to the south when the mark's out here, out to the west. So at dark, we made about 3 tacks close into Cape Bovard, or between Mandurah and Cape Bovard. And I said, well, to the crew, look, I'm going to take a punt, and when I can lay 30-odd degrees outside the true course to the weather mark, I'll go onto the port tack and I shall go out to sea. So we did that. By midnight, we were reaching to Bunker Bay in a 25-knot easterly on the beam, full sail, couldn't be bothered reefing, it was too hard, pumping like hell, and doing about 7 or 8 knots through the water, directly coming up in a big arc. At dawn, when we thought we were pretty close, there was the mark dead ahead. So this big arc we'd made brought us up exactly onto the mark. When we were rounding the mark, the guy with a loud hailer on the naval boat called out to me, "Have you seen Galasma anywhere?" Galasma was a 42-footer and the second fastest boat in the fleet. So we were quite chuffed. Anyway, we deposited Bill in the water and set off for Siesta Park. And we had light airs all day going through Siesta Park and to Bunbury. On the way home, we had the wind went south, due south, and blew 25 knots. So we set the spinnaker and we took off for west end of Rottnest. We went so fast, well, the boat had a white deck, it was all white deck. We went so fast all night, the wave forward was up to the stem head, the wave aft was up to the transom top, in between was a big hole full of white foam. Fortunately, she steered quite well, but one mistake and we were in dire straits. We did that for the entire time until after dawn the next morning. So we covered the distance to West End at an average of about 7.5 knots or something for this tiny little boat. And my two crew, one of them was a professional fisherman, the other one was a yachtsman, and they were, when I was on watch and they were below, I could hear them saying, "The bastard's mad." Anyway, I might have been mad, but we got away with it, but they're all good helmsmen, so we never lost her. At West End, when the breeze was still south, the spinnaker fell in the water, because when we fitted it out with a borrowed spinnaker, we found that the shackle wasn't long enough to hook it into the shackle on the mast. So we connected them with 3 or 4 turns of 7-strand copper wire. And when we got to West End, the copper wire broke and the spinnaker fell in the water. But from then on, we had to beat into light easterly around the Fairway Buoy, which is the shipping entry to Fremantle. And we got light airs. We had a borrowed Genoa, but we got into Fremantle, official end of the race at about 1:30, something like that, in the afternoon. And Horace Rummel, the famous old member of Royal Perth Yacht Club, was there, and he's like, and he turned to his mates and said, "That can't be rugged. That cannot be rugged." In fact, it was. We were home, limit boat, we were home miles in front of anyone we should have been. So that's the story of the race. Now, Ken Court, I won't have time for that, but okay. Not you, Ken. Ken's the current owner. He's owned the boat before. He's loved it. He has made he and Mike Foster have made a magnificent job, and a lot of you have been there to have a look at it, of the Rugged. He's made more of a day boat than she was when she was new, but she is brilliant and she's lovely. And what I'd like to do right now is say, give Ken Court and his helpers some acclamation, because he's driven it all the way from Mandurah via Perth to Hobart, towed behind his 4-wheel drive. And I reckon that's a tremendous effort. Well, I'm only half an hour, but that's all right. And there's one other thing I would like to do for Ken. When you participated in an ocean race in the early days, and I imagine it still happens, we were all presented with a little plaque to screw on the bulkhead to say that you'd participated. Well, I was presented with mine, and it had my name on it, and we won, and it should have gone on the bulkhead. But in the intervening few days, the boat had been sold to Norm Steer. And Thelma, his widow, and I looked at each other and said, well, the boat's sold. We're not going to give them the bulkhead plaque. We're going to keep the bulkhead plaque. So Thelma died, of course, in due course, and I haven't died. So, yet. So I kept the plaque, and I kept it for 68 years. What I'd like to do now is officially present it to Ken Court. Ken. Photograph.
Right. Now, Len, Those that have been on the boat recently, in the last few days, have seen that plaque.
Have they?
So someone took a copy of it at the time.
Must
Uh,
Well,
so
that's
now we've got the real one.
That is the real one.
We've had fun doing the rebuild on Rugged, and Len was involved in the process. It took 2 years.
That's right.
Just come a little bit closer to the microphone, mate.
Yeah, and as when we put it back in the water, it had a significant weather helm. And I said, Len, what's going on? He said, you or someone's put a bigger rudder on the boat. And I said, well, I haven't, but anyhow, confession came. A few weeks later, Len said, look, I was only an amateur when I designed Rugged. I've reworked the numbers and the mast should be 8 inches further forward.
That's right.
Well, you could have told us two years earlier. And therefore we've had to modify it and put the bowsprit on, which has balanced the boat. So a little bit of a...
I'll interview and just say he's a little bit harder to live with than we were in those days.
It's been great to work with you.
And you too, Ken.
Len, you've actually transformed the marine industry as well as the pleasure side in WA with the fast cray boats.
We did.
It's really let them get crays in quickly and then off to Japan live. So it's made a huge difference to so many industries and so many lives. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Ken.
Good.
Thank you.
Well done for a
question.
youngster.
Now, I'd like to say this about question time. I'm as deaf as a post. The last 3 years, my hearing has gone to hell. And I have hearing aids. They're about as good as a wooden leg. They're better than nothing. So if I have trouble hearing a question, then I'll ask someone to interpret for me. So.
Okay, look, thank you very much indeed, Len. Give him a hand, folks. I think he's done a wonderful job so far. No question about it.
Thank you, everybody.
And now comes questions time. Hands, I've got a hand here. One at a time, folks, and if you can, keep it
Take
short,
the
please.
microphone.
Yes.
Oh, thank you, Len. With respect to the design of the cray boats, the fast boats, can you say if the work of Raymond Hunt influenced you at all, or maybe vice versa?
I can only say that in my head, no one influenced what I designed. Obviously something must have, because I studied naval architecture from books. So I would be looking at Peter Duquesne, who designed fast war vessels, all sorts of people I have read. So that would be influenced what I did before I got my own experience. But no one directly influenced me. But if you're going to design a monohedron powerboat, there's not very many variations in the bottom that you can do. Deep V, shallow V, whatever, but a monohedron is a monohedron hull. So you don't require outside influence. And I became a naval architect just by simply knowing what to do about a boat from a very young age, and all the books added up mainly for the calculations required.
Okay, thanks very much, Len. We'll take one from this side if we can. We saw a hand up.
Yeah, two-hander. First one is, what were your favourite WA timbers to work with? If you worked with WA timbers.
What was your favourite WA timber to work with?
Well, we didn't have a lot of options in WA. We had no softwoods at all. They were all imported. And our early boats were all built out of Jarrah, which was really heavy, but a racing boat, we would put Oregon topsides. In my own designs, if I did Jarrah all the way up to the neckline, I made sure that the superstructure was light timbers, and we used plywood very early. The real nautical waterproof plywood was coming in at the time. So we used plywood decks and kept the superstructure light. So the centre of gravity due to the heavier topsides, wasn't much of an influence. But it would definitely, for racing, much better to have lighter timber, but we either had to use imported timbers or use jarrow, and none of us had much money, so we used jarrow.
Okay, that's good. You said two, sir? Make it short if you can, please.
Great. And you mentioned that you were mainly self-taught reading books on naval architecture. Did you have anyone in your life that mentored you, that you apprenticed under?
Anyone else?
I'm sorry, I was distracted.
Sorry, just a moment.
No worries.
Can you have that again, please? Sorry.
Yeah, you mentioned that you were self-taught and your naval architecture was mainly through your own reading of books. Did you have a mentor that you apprenticed under?
The reading book.
Yeah, okay, you did most of your work in reading, but did you have a mentor when
No.
you were... No.
No, I did not. No, I first designed my first boat when I was 15 with no tuition whatsoever, and it was successful. I designed my Rugged at 17, which was successful. The calculations required for these little boats are pretty simple. So, no, I had no mentor at all because I was the first naval architect in Western Australia. So there was no one to talk to.
Okay, that's fine. Could we have a question from this side, please? Sir.
I had the joy of sailing on Karen a few years ago. She's down in Albany. Professor John Kagi, I think, is the owner. I'm not sure whether he's still alive, though. We had a few mishaps, furling sails and getting frapping around and throwing the sheets, and poor John goes up ahead. He must be well in the 70s at the time, and went straight overboard. And the sea was pretty choppy. And I thought, my God, how do you start this boat? How do you keep an eye on him? How do you get the sail down and turn it? Well, I knew how to do all that, but keeping an eye on John was another thing. So I looked over the side, he disappeared, but he came up right beside me, and I grabbed him and pulled him on board. But she's a beautiful little boat, and that was your Bunbury race boat, wasn't it? Yeah.
There's no question there. Look, thank you very much indeed for that.
Thank you for that.
That's wonderful. That's good. Do we have another question from this side? Sir, thank you very much.
Len, you mentioned that you were not very keen on steel boats, but you did design a beautiful 50 barkentine, the STS Lewin, beautiful ship which I've sailed on for many years.
Have you?
And it had a design life originally of 50 years, and I think it's about 35 years old. But I was told by Carol Stannon, the CEO, that they're starting to raise money and think about the design of a replacement, Lewin 3. Will you have time to design that one for us?
Did I get it right?
I think that's a simple yes or no, Len. So I think in great respect he'll think about it, but we need to be aware that there might be
The
something else
replacement.
coming along.
I think the replacement is not on the cards. She's been surveyed for another 25 years.
Okay, I have a gentleman just here, sir. You were raising a hand, were you? We'll just get a microphone to you, please. Thank you. Keep it short and sweet, please.
G'day, Len. Are any of your old design plans still available if someone wanted to
Oh,
build one
God,
of your
yes.
old wooden boats?
I'm hopeless.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Are there any old plans of your boats are still available?
No, short answer.
Okay, do we have any questions on this side? How we going? Yep, okay, right.
I know him. I know him. No, you need a
You
microphone.
need a microphone,
Hang on, I'm
sorry.
first. G'day, Len. I'm the current custodian of Rugged,
Where are we?
and it was built in Cabbage Tree Creek up in Brisbane by Clem Masters in 1966. And I'm just curious to know if you had any correspondence with Clem.
This is a Rugged up in
Yeah,
Brisbane,
got that.
and he wasn't too sure whether you'd had any correspondence from there.
No, I don't really think so. We've had a lot of inquiries, and they were normally routed through Facebook to the Randell fan club, and they might be filtered out on the way, but I don't think so. I don't
Okay,
think
yeah,
so.
this was in 1966,
Yeah,
and she did it Brisbane to Gladstone.
yes. Well, I wouldn't know unless they contact me directly because, well, I thought I'd had about 10 ruggers in Australia and I find out there's about 50.
Thank you.
All built, some 5 built off the same set of plans.
Thank you very much. Folks, we're just going to ask this gentleman in the maroon hat. Keep it short and sweet, sir.
How are you, Len? Yeah, we're lucky enough in Albany to have a few of your boats, the Karen, the Wraith, which you both built, which is good. But my question is, you basically changed the fishing fleet or the way people fished in Western Australia, because we moved from heavy displacement to
You'll have to give me that one.
so I haven't finished my question yet. So what was the first chined fishing boat that you undertook?
Okay, I got that. The first one was about 30 feet, a straight plywood light displacement boat which had a petrol motor for a client, a big fishing family in Geraldton. It did 13 knots and could carry, working in the Abrolhos, could carry quite a few pots. It was competing with boats which were doing 6.5 knots. So this guy could go and pull his gear starting at 9 o'clock in the morning and be home by 2 o'clock instead of starting at dawn and coming home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So that was the start of the fast crayfish boats. And from then I was designing fast crayfish boats up until 1990. So at one stage, half the 870 crayfish boats on the west coast, well, a third were Randalls, half fast plywood boats, and then aluminium. As soon as GRP came in, everybody converted to GRP, and we literally built hundreds. In the last 10 years of fiberglass fishing boat construction, we built 240 big GRP boats, and they're as far afield as Tahiti.
Okay, folks, I think we've got time for one more question. So let's take this gentleman here. The mask on, sir. I hope you can speak without the mask, if that's possible, please.
Oh, you'll answer for straight away.
That first boat, what year was that? The first plywood cray boat that you did for Geraldton? I was just curious to know
When was the first
what year that was.
cray boat? When did you design it?
When?
When, yes.
Good question. I don't know exactly when it was, but I'll just think a moment. That would have been about 1960, for the Burton family. And from then on, I was flat chat. In 1 year, I designed 26 of them in 1 year. One every 2 weeks.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a very, very busy gentleman here. There's no question about that. And he's been doing this for an awfully long time. Now, just in passing, Mr. Kingcourt has got a few of these little books. Wave it in the air, Ken, so they can all see it. This is the story of Rugged. He's happy to do some signing out in the foyer area. So once we start moving out, we'd like to give you that opportunity to have a chat to Ken and maybe even get one of these magazines. Now, my last task for the afternoon is to present this to Len. This is from the symposium and from the Australian Wooden Boat Festival. This is a measure of appreciation. This is a plaque. And Len, thank you very much indeed for speaking today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, thank you to the Wooden Boat Festival for inviting me 4 years ago.
Okay, thank you all. That's yours as well.